Well, look what Ludwig von Mises said. I'm going to read it. He said, there is no means of avoiding the final collapse of a boom brought about by credit expansion. The alternative is only whether the crisis should come sooner as a result of voluntary abandonment of further credit expansion, or we're not there yet, or later as a final and total catastrophe of the currency system involved. We're heading in that direction. You lower rates, you have acquiesced once again. You're just going to reignite inflation.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. And once again, it is that time of the week to dig into the retail and perhaps the futures level of the silver market and the gold market as well, because I'm joined by Andy Schectman of Miles Franklin Precious Metals for his weekly call, where quite a bit to discuss this week. Obviously, some shocking news over the weekend that we'll touch on in terms of the Trump rally and some things happening in gold and silver as well. And we'll also take a look at the premiums and what might be coming up from the Fed in our near future, as that's getting exciting again. So, Andy, it's nice to see you back here after seeing you in person last week at the Sprott show, which was fun to do and had a good call there. And how are you feeling today?
Feeling good, brother. And I got to tell you, I preferred doing it in person with you. It was a lot of fun actually seeing you and doing a live stream like that. We live so close to one another. It's nice to actually do things in person once in a while, but this is better than nothing. So it's good to be back. Thanks for having me, buddy.
Yeah, and perhaps we'll do another one of those live and in person soon enough. So it was fun to catch up and do that. And perhaps a week later, I guess maybe a good place to start before we dig into the news from this weekend. Any general reactions from the show? I would say mine, if I can answer my own question and go first here and cut you off. I saw a mouth about to open and answer come out.
That's all good. I'd
Yeah,
like to hear yours.
I thought it was a great conference. Again, this was my first time seeing the Rule Symposium in Florida versus Vancouver. I mean, there were people there. It wasn't like it was like you would imagine a Bitcoin conference when prices are crossing 50 or 60,000. So I think there's interest in what's going on, yet it really pointed out to me how we've had the significant move in both gold and silver, yet are we at a point where a mania or mainstream is coming in? That certainly hasn't been the case. Keith Neumeyer talked about it a bit on the equity and fund level as well. So just in terms of where we're at in the cycle, that was perhaps my main takeaway. And that said, I'll really let you answer this.
Well, I think that's a really great point, man. I do. I mean, look, you got positive real yields. You got what appears to be exodus out of the ETFs. You got 5.5% interest rates on short-term treasuries. You have a strong dollar. You got all these reasons why gold should be meandering. You have a history of people waiting for the shoe to drop. When we get near, price levels like now of 2,400, yet through all of that, here we are at 2,400, even with supposedly, which I don't believe, the Chinese stopping purchases for 2 months. And that's emblematic of the participation at the show. You're right. It was, similar to the show that I went to in Vegas last year, the Silver Symposium show. The amount of participation would have been, I guess, limited to the people who are the gold bugs, the silver bugs, the people who understand what's happening. But this is not Silver Squeeze. This is not Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, where we added 14,000 clients in 45 days, or in Silver Squeeze, where it was 18 hours a day, 7 days a week for weeks, as people were jumping on that bandwagon. But I guess that is a good contrarian indicator. Again, as the price continues to march higher, no matter how many times they hit it, it keeps on coming back. Silver had a massive move last week, and now here gold up back above $2,400. So I don't know, Chris, if the public participation is a good indicator or not. It would appear to me that oftentimes it's a good contrarian indicator. The more public interest, the greater the likelihood of seeing the price get beat down, and the less the public interest. It just seems that the market seems to quietly creep higher without really getting much in the way of fanfare. So it's probably actually a bullish sign as we head into the end of the year.
Yeah, and again, we're recording Monday afternoon, so 30.90 on silver, 24.30 on gold. It's quite amazing. We're once again not that far off from the all-time highs on gold. So, we had the furious rally a few months earlier. Like you said, we've seen some sell-offs, and yet here we are. And of course, when you look at what's happening in the world, a lot of which we'll dig into, including the Fed not only looking at cutting interest rates in September, now some possibility of July being mentioned, but certainly look, we're over 80% in September, yet certainly the months behind there, we're seeing that priced in as well.
Yeah.
One note on what you mentioned there, Andrew, in terms of money coming out of the ETFs, actually have seen a little bit of a change of that, especially in gold, where there were several months consecutive of outflows, and then we've seen some inflows coming back in. Where that leads us, again, it's been a bit mixed, but at least just for people who are watching at home, that they can see that has been the news of the ETF inflows. And perhaps the next thing I would love to get to is your thoughts on what happened this weekend with the Trump rally. Certainly, I think more than anything, a sad day for the country. And I get it. There's some people who can't stand Trump, and that's fine. But just that, if nothing else, the fact that now when we have people who are running for office, this is my first time seeing something quite like that. Again, I was just born when the attempted assassination on Reagan took place, and obviously JFK was a little before my time. And I hope this comes out in the right way. I don't think everyone necessarily will feel that way, but just as it impacted me as it happened and I was reading about it, it felt like a feeling I've only experienced from September 11th or what I've read of the JFK assassination, in terms of just a significant day of this is something that, people aren't going to be forgetting about and moving on from, especially as so many questions about how it could have happened in the way that it's presented, of this guy just climbing a ladder on the roof. Now we're seeing the videos where people were warning about him for minutes in advance. And that part is perhaps reminiscent of JFK, where there was so many unanswered questions that just, if aside from what sides or predisposition someone has, if you're seeing this, it's just, well, that's odd. And it seems like we're just getting started on this one, and more than anything, just sending prayers out to Trump and his family, and certainly the families of the other people who were affected. And again, you can perhaps add more in terms of the political implications leading up to the election, where that indicates we're at in this country, which ties in a lot of the things that you talked about for months and years. And those were my reactions, and I'm sure a lot of people, including myself, would love to hear what you observed and felt as it happened.
The first thing I would say is that anyone, regardless of their feelings for Trump, who would say awful things, or wished he would have been hit, and I am sure there are, it goes to underscore how horrible the divisiveness is in a country that was always prideful of being united. This country has always done well with its back against the wall, but that usually came with a country that was united. And I've been harping for quite some time about how much it distresses me, how divided we are, how we're in many ways identified and defined by who we voted for in the last election. I was equally as sad and reminiscent of 9/11, but in a different way. That this would allow to be happen. I mean, and it was. When you look at the overhead view of where the shooter was, 100-yard shot with an AR-15 with the red dot scope is taking candy from a baby. I've shot many times. I have a concealed permit. I've shot for years, including AR-15s with the red dot scope from 100 yards. You can hit a bullseye with no problem at all if you have a steady hand. I mean, they're that accurate. He's lucky as hell to be alive. But the more importantly is not only how different would the world look if it was an eighth of an inch separating what happened and what could have happened. I mean, that just goes to show how fragile the whole system is. An eighth of an inch separates chaos from not, separates a civil war from not. What would that say to Xi Jinping and Putin? What would the world look like had he been killed? And it's more along the lines of how the hell, as you said, would anyone be allowed a direct sight line 100 yards away without having officers stationed there? If this were your children and you were in charge of security, that'd be the first damn place you would put people, the direct line of sight from an elevated position. It's really awful to think that could they have actually allowed this to happen. You see the videos of them screaming, there's someone up there with the gun. There's someone up there with the gun. There are other videos of seeing the Secret Service move people away from the corner of the stage where the bullet came from seconds before he was shot. Could it really be? Is it possible? And this is some of the stuff I talked about in my presentation at Rick Rule. Could these things that we are seeing, like 20 million people entering this country illegally, could it really be possible that this was done intentionally? Could it be possible that the elections weren't fair? Could it be possible that the judicial system is two-tiered? I'm not saying one way or the other that they are. I'm just simply saying now there is perception that perhaps these things are true. And it's a very sad indictment of the system. And I think people need to understand it's never been more important to be a contrarian. It's never been more important to understand that this is something that could spin out of control one way or the other. And it's never been more important to, I think, look at when we talk about gold and silver, to me, it is protection from what is coming. And when you see something as sacred as an election, and the ability to have a rally be compromised in that level where, I mean, the most basic logistics in terms of safeguarding were wide open, and this happened. I thank God that he's alive. And I'll tell you something. I wish I didn't feel the way I did about it. I wish I didn't feel that this was more orchestrated than not. I wish I didn't. But I can't help but think either that's the case, or again, the people that are controlling the Secret Service is inept. I mean, inept. I mean, that's the only way that you can say it. How the hell do you allow that to happen? The one place where he's a sitting duck, you allow some kid with an AR-15, which is, you'd have a violin bag on your back, walking through the neighborhoods, climbing up on a ladder. I mean, how the hell does that happen? It doesn't happen. If you look at what they're doing at the RNC now in Milwaukee, they have 3 or 4 layers of security that you have to get through to get anywhere near it. I don't know, dude. Chris, I just, these are the things that bother me more than anything. And these are the things that I think are probably more important than anything when you put together the mismanagement of the dollar, the weaponization of it, all of the things we see offshore, the lawlessness, the open borders, the questions surrounding the elections and the judicial system, this, the divisiveness, these are the things that drive me insane. And I think should not be underestimated what they really mean. I mean, to me, it makes me feel like these people will stop at nothing to keep him from taking office. I hope I'm wrong. I've said on so many podcasts, if you expect it to be smooth sailing between now and November, I have a bridge to sell you. And this to me is emblematic of what we should expect to see over the next several weeks and few months leading up to the big BRICS meeting in October. where again, another 59 countries have expressed their desire to join the BRICS, and the election in November. And God help us if we don't see some sort of a change. And this is not an indictment against President Biden. This is a fact that this country has gone astray, and these are the types of things that I think define being astray. The fundamentals that made this country great seem to have been stepped on over the last few years, and this right is the icing on the cake. And I hope that we see maybe this will be the beginning of a rallying cry to find unity, to find compromise, and to get rid of this divisiveness that starts at the top and moves all the way down. So I guess we'll see, but I will tell you that I was really, really affected and saddened by, angry by it, really angered. And I can imagine how this will be polarizing for people that are already angry. I was angry to see that this would allow to be happen in front of the whole world to see. And I was watching it live. And when it first happened, I was kind of, what was that? What just happened? And even the way that CNN phrased it right after it happened, Trump pulled off stage because he fell. I mean, the divisiveness that is being created is just ridiculous. And I don't know, man. I just hope that we can all realize that we're Americans and we're not blue and red. We're not black and white. We're not rich and poor. We're Americans all wanting the same things. Our kids to grow up in a country with safety, and we just want to be able to feed our families and have a good life. I mean, in essence, we all want the same thing, and yet we're going so far away from those things. And this is no different. It really shook me up quite a bit, and promised myself I wouldn't go into the politics of it this week as badly as I want to, but I'll just simply say that it was one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life, because of the broader implications and now the wondering, could this really have been planned, or avoided and not? And I hate where things go into the recesses of my mind, but hopefully it's the beginning of a change of unity and peace, because if not, I hate to see where this is going to go.
Yeah, I can certainly understand what you're saying. And in some ways, it's, to me, the political world is so foreign and sometimes hard to even imagine what it's like to live in that type of environment. And like you said, just a bit of a sad day for the country.
But you know what, Chris? If an eighth of an inch separates chaos and not,
I was thinking about that, how that's incredible that could have been that close, yet escape relatively unscathed. So I think
yeah.
that's
And if
quite.
it, where are the riots? If it were the other way around, there would be Antifa and riots and burning and looting and the supposedly crazy right. I don't see that happening, but maybe just a growing unity amongst the people who I think the right now are the working class, everyday American who believe in God and guns and hard work and American values. They are not the crazy lunatic fringe, which, I mean, if I were being honest, I would say it's everything that I witnessed in Minneapolis that made me move here. These were not angry Republicans, anything but. And if this really was something to stop him, it just goes to show how far they will go. And, I just hope that God protects him and his family, moving into November and forever. I mean, it's one of these deals where it just shouldn't be this way. It just shouldn't be this way, and it is. And I think it's very concerning for the future of this country. And if this is what it's come down to, we're no better off than a banana republic, for that matter.
Well, I like to think there's still some time on the clock, and human nature is capable of powerful things that we often might not be able to see a straight path to just yet. So either case, well said. And in there, you mentioned the BRICS meeting in October, which reminded me of something. I was doing another interview this morning, and after we wrapped up, Andrew O'Donnell was asking me, if I thought they were going to announce something like the unit in October, and thought it was interesting in terms of just thinking about, well, what could a timeline be? And I'll share what I told him, and then we can get your take. Just, I don't know that I'm expecting that at that October meeting they're saying, hey, here's the unit, we're rolling it out, and now we're going to start settling in trade imbalances. From the first Pepe Escobar article, he did mention that they're now moving on to a stage of public awareness. So if they release some information in October and give some sort of a timeline, again, I'd like to have Matt Riley back on, perhaps with you and Vince, and we could all ask him
Love that.
questions. Could be a good idea to do that soon. Did talk with him last week, so in either case, again, that's a general guess. Is it possible they rolled something out in October? Of course, it's possible. But in terms of just what would my best guess be, I think we could hear more about it, at least from the way of I've heard details phrased. I would think perhaps more 2025 that we see the potential for something like that to be in action. Again, I wish I had a more specific answer, but that was the answer I gave Andrew. I'm curious what you would say to that one.
Well, they've done things very methodically for quite some time. And, we're all aware that China and now even Japan, to a degree, Russia, Saudi Arabia, they've all been selling bonds. Let's just say the BRICS nations have been selling bonds, right? At the same time, arguably, they're buying gold, which we can see. At the same time, the United States and the United Kingdom and these Western nations that we're supposed to believe are buying our bonds are going further into debt. We're supposed to believe that the United Kingdom and Ireland and the Caymans are these are debtor nations that are buying our debt, which we need to sell in order just to pay the interest on the previous debt. And so we see a situation where the US and the UK continue going further into debt. And these countries have virtually nothing in the way of energy production. There was a article that just came out and commodities that came out on the UK a few months ago by some politician saying we've got ourselves in a bad place. We're reliant on mainly China and the rest of the world for the majority of all the things we need, these natural resources. You could say the same thing about the United States. So we have very little in the way of energy and natural resource production, where last year I read an article that 70-80% of all the rare earths were produced in China and the Eurasian continent, but 100% were refined in China. That's kind of emblematic of it. But these other countries, so we have very little in the way of energy production and factory capacity. All the factories are in China. They make everything. We make nothing. And we're going further into debt, buying government debt. They're buying our debt, the UK is, and we're going further into debt in order to buy commodities like oil and energy production from the BRICS countries, who instead of, they sell us their oil, and what are we doing? What are they doing with the proceeds? They're buying gold instead of putting it into treasuries. They're buying gold, and we're creating more debt in order to buy energy from these countries. They used to buy our debt, but now they don't. So we have to sell that debt to the UK and to the Cayman Islands and Ireland, if you believe that. But this is a doom loop in the respect that these BRICS nations continue to pile into gold and other commodities with the proceeds of the energy we buy from them and the commodities we buy from them, which only pushes those prices up higher. And when you talk about gold going higher, as part of the new BRICS currency settlement, which will be deliverable, this just falls right into the hands of the BRICS countries. So the longer they wait, the higher the price goes in gold, and the more reliant the West is upon them for these commodities. And at the same time, you have a massive growing mass. 59 more countries said they want to join, coming out of Novigrad 2 weeks ago. This is something that when you have more and more countries sign on officially, all accepting a common settlement currency that is not US dollars, that is that is settling in essence in gold, which is 40% gold, which is deliverable, which is held within the own borders of these countries. And that's a very important point here. If you're in the unit white paper, it talks each one of these countries will hold their own gold. So when you see this mass repatriation effort, and in particular, India is a good example, repatriating 100 metric tons they've held at the B of A, excuse me, at the Bank of England, B of E, Bank of England since 1991, and all of the countries repatriating their gold from the New York Fed. Well, that makes sense. These countries understand they can hold their own gold. They'll continue to buy gold because it will be what they settle in, which has outperformed the bond market 2-to-1 over the last 25 years with no counterparty risk. So the longer they wait, the more countries join on, the higher the price of gold is going to go, and the more trouble that the West will have in I think finding natural resources and people willing to hold their debt. So would it surprise me if they issued it in October? No, it wouldn't. But I think it would also not surprise me if they waited another year, to your point, in 2025. And James Rickards has an interesting take on it. He says, yeah, it's all about mass adoption, that right now there's 10 countries that they can shop with if they had a common settlement currency. 10. What happens if it's 69? If they said, fine, the other 59 are in. Now you can buy goods and services from 69 countries instead of from 10, which was previously 5. And pretty soon you have such a massive swath of GDP, human population, commodities, shipping lanes, military might, that not only is it a massive, massive real entity in every single way, but then issuing that common settlement currency, it's almost 100% guarantee that it works to a massive detriment to the dollar, to the treasury market, and to the way things have always been in this country.
Yes, and that also touches on something that I will pull up here, because similar to how you and I over the past couple of weeks have been going through some of the highlights and quotes from the World Bank's hand guide for asset managers to buy gold or invest in gold. I've been going through the In Gold We Trust report, great report put out each year by Ronnie Stoifferle and his crew, that has a highlight here and mentions Gold Investing Handbook for Asset Managers are recommending central banks hold up to 22% gold. So it's like you see these things happening one by one, day by day in front of you, as you pointed out. And we have more of those, although a few other things I wanted to cover before we wrap up here today, Andrew, because this one was so, I don't know what word one would use to describe it. Here's an article by Jim Rickards, who was at the show last week, and I had obviously never heard this one before, so I wanted to pass that by. Petrodollar deal was concluded in June 1974 under the Nixon administration. Okay, we have heard that part before. It was a tense time following the 1973 Yom Kippur War and the Saudi oil embargo of exports to the U.S. So far, so good. Yeah. Yeah, this is Jim writing here, saying that he played a role in the run-up to the deal when he went to the White House to meet with Helmut Sonnenfeld, Henry Kissinger's most trusted aide. We discussed a plan to invade Saudi Arabia in case the Saudis didn't agree to what the Nixon administration had put on the table. I've never heard anything to that effect before, but it was darn interesting. Andrew, any thoughts there?
I mean, that's what we've always done. You think, we went to Iraq looking for weapons of mass destruction. Sorry, we didn't find any. That's the difference. And here we are 20 years later, still there. This is what they've always done, through coercion. And now look at how different things are. You got Saudi Arabia just warned the G7 that if they steal the 300 billion in sovereign assets, that they will sell their European bond holdings, starting with those issued by the French Treasury, if the US EU coalition moves forward with this. So that's how far we've come, because they're finding safety in numbers. But yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. And I read that actually. I read that this is a little bit of an older article. I did read it. And yeah, I don't think it's, and they were probably told that too. That look, he probably went there and said, look, I don't want to, force you into doing this, but this is what's going to happen. That's kind of the playbook that we've used for a long time. It's one of coercion. And if you even look at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, it's all about cooperation. If you look at the BRICS, There's not going to be a common currency, at least not yet. It will be a common settlement currency with every country maintaining their own central bank digital currency and their own monetary autonomy. The BRICS use a rotating presidency so that there's not one voice louder than the others. These are all things that maybe they're learning as a result of what happens if you go around the world in a unipolar way and doing it in a coercive manner. So I know that this is the only place I've ever read that, but it makes good sense to me.
Yeah, I just thought that was rather fascinating and ties into a lot of the things that we talk about in terms of foreign policy. So passing that along. And just since you and I haven't checked in on this in a while, although obviously the Fed probabilities of rate cuts have changed quite a bit. Now we see September got 98% chance priced in of a cut, almost going down by the meeting. Citibank had said cut in September, cuts in the next 7 meetings after that. And a quick look, obviously we had the CPI last week where came, according to government numbers, actually came in month over month. Here is the core PCE, which you can see has been dropping. There it was at 2.8% in a month ago, and then dropping to 2.6% last month. Again, I'll leave aside the views of the flaws of those numbers, but other thing that Jerome Powell has mentioned could lead to rate cuts would be rising unemployment. And I'll point out once again that here we are at 3.4% last May, up to 4.1% now. So seems like the cuts are coming, which is, yeah, puts you in that weird space as a metals investor. Do I think this whole pattern and the cycles that we go through are ideal for human life and the benefit of most people? No, but at least to the degree that we're looking at what's happening with gold and silver, seems like the cuts are coming and there's going to be a few of them.
Yeah, well, I have a hard time. I've said forever, I can't imagine that they would lower rates, and they haven't so far. I mean, remember, there was going to be 4 or 5 cuts for sure, and then, well, maybe one, and then maybe none. Maybe they're going to raise. And there's $14 trillion in debt that needs to be retired this year as maturing debt, or to pay interest expenses, or to cover the ridiculous amount of irresponsible fiscal spending and deficits of our government. How the hell do they come up with that? Maybe you can, as rates have been going down, what you are seeing is the Fed intervening already through, as Jim Willey puts it, the UK and Ireland and the Cayman Islands funneling money under the table. Because look, when you have a situation where more bonds are sold than are bought, rates rise, right? But when more supply, that's more supply than demand. But when more bonds are bought than are sold, rates fall. So we're supposed to believe that someone is interested in buying our 10-year treasuries, and they are doing so to drive rates down. I just have a hard time believing anyone would be buying our bonds right now when we see Russia and China and Japan dumping our bonds right now. I have a hard, who the hell's buying it? Is it monetization? Look, I think it's important to remember, there it is right there. And I think it's important to remember
He's a
what
buyer of bonds right now, I hear.
Yes. Well, look what Ludwig von Mises said. I'm going to read it. He said, there is no means of avoiding the final collapse of a boom brought about by credit expansion. The alternative is only whether the crisis should come sooner as a result of voluntary abandonment of further credit expansion, or we're not there yet, or later as a final and total catastrophe of the currency system involved. We're heading in that direction. You lower rates, you have acquiesced once again. You're just going to reignite inflation. Yeah, the numbers they tell us are all fugazi. You can't believe them. Inflation is way higher than they're telling us. And this is a politicized event by the Fed to lower rates 2 months before the election. And if they do it, fine. But I think it's stupid, and they'll never normalize their balance sheet. And it just signals to the world, why the hell would you want to sell us your oil or your commodities for a currency that once again will give in to inflation over austerity? And once again is rigged. I mean, it's rigged in every way, even in the way that they measure all of the numbers to gauge their policy decision, including unemployment numbers. And if they hired John Williams instead of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, maybe we would be able to direct monetary policy to right the ship. But what they are doing by giving in and lowering rates is the worst thing that they can do, and just giving up on ever getting this house in order. And it would start with stop spending. And the spending that we do is ridiculous. $100,000 per second is the amount of debt that we are creating. That's $1 trillion every 100 days. And not slowing down. So yeah, if you believe that inflation is where it is, I got a bridge to sell you. And that's why you take a look at all of these markets that just keep going straight up when compared against, against like the 10-year treasury. When you're comparing it, all of these markets are going straight up. All that money that's been created and poured into the system, whether it be gold or Bitcoin or the S&P or the NASDAQ, all of these things is shooting up because of all this money, and that will just keep it going higher. So it's good for gold. It's good for the market. And ultimately, it's not good for this country. So yeah, they'll probably lower rates, but I think it's really a dumb thing because it's only going to make a bad situation ultimately worse.
Yeah, and you mentioned in there, why would oil producing and resource producing nations want to be selling those if we're lowering interest rates, debasing the currency? I'm also curious. I mean, maybe this is thinking a little bit ahead, although I think that's part of the goal here. So if the unit were to become successful, I also wonder how, if you have countries that are selling resources like oil or lithium or different things that are required in the world, if you now have the ability to get some gold backing behind your payment, does that essentially, and you have the dollar competing against that, does that essentially eventually force them to match to some degree? I don't know the answer to that, but that's what I've been thinking about lately. And
Well, yeah, that's Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, said any CBDC that's not backed by something is fiat. And the paper they wrote before that, at the beginning of last year, gold as an international reserve currency, question mark or comma, a barbarous relic no more, question mark. They know that. That's why you got what's her name? The gal that Trump would like to be, Judy Shelton, talking about issuing 30-year bonds that are redeemable in gold. People understand that, I think we get to a point where trust is no longer found within a treasury bond or a currency, but in something like gold. And this is something that ultimately I think the world is moving towards. There's no other reason for it to have been reclassified tier one, and now they're trying to get it reclassified to a high quality liquid asset, which is even a little bit higher than tier one. And this is a situation where they understand that gold is, I think, the only thing that will inspire trust in a system that has lost a whole bunch of it. And maybe this is why they're all buying it. They're all repatriating it, and they're shedding debt instruments like treasuries to accumulate more of it. And the unit just, I think, underscores that. And when you see Saudi Arabia become a full participant in Project Enbridge, which is going to be the trading vehicle for the unit, and it is not compatible with US dollars, I mean, wake the hell up. We are moving away from this system. And the hallmark of the way the BRICS do things is slowly, methodically, and the right way. This is not something that's just a shotgun. This is 17, 18 years in the making, and it is accelerating due to the idiocy of the Western policies. But yeah, the only way the West hangs on would be to issue a competitive
or competing.
Thank you. A competitive, I feel like Porky Pig there for a second, a competitive currency backed by gold and maybe through the IMF. And I think the Western nations, it's the only way that they will be able to compete with the BRICS, who will issue a common settlement currency pegged to gold. Not compatible with the US dollar is Project Enbridge, and Saudi Arabia full participant. You can see where this is going. And if it is redeemable in gold, well, geez, that makes sense why it's been reclassified and why all the banks are buying it and why all the banks are repatriating it. That makes sense. But yet, you have to go to Arcadia Economics to hear any of this, or to another channel that is talking about this, because you don't see this on the mainstream at all. And so the mainstream, who is focused on stupidity like, oh, will the Fed lower rates by 25 basis points? And what's that going to do to my NVIDIA position? It will be completely run over by what's coming. And yeah, gold is the trust. And this is a system that most of the world has lost all trust in. So yeah, I think that's the only way the West competes, Chris, is to match them with some form of gold backing to a new system.
Well, that's pretty much what I was seeing there on that one as well. And Andrew, for perhaps anyone that is seeing this forecast for interest rate cuts, not just your or my forecast, but market pricing, and thinking, gee, this might be a good time to have some physical gold or silver. Do you have a deal for them that can put some money back in their pockets by a special at a great rate on the gold or silver side?
Yeah, in silver we have pre-65 half dollars at $2.50 over spot, which are fantastic. Half dollars are much harder to come by than the dimes and quarters, which are a little bit less money, but they are much harder to come by. And so those would be assorted half dollars. It could be Kennedy's, it could be Franklin's. I'm not sure which ones you'll get, but a really good deal. We also have the 2024 Silver Britannia for $3.29 over spot, any quantity while supplies last. In gold, we have the 1/10 ounce, I believe. Is it the one? Yeah, it's the 1/10 ounce.
I know you like the functionality of those and the
Yeah,
versatility.
exactly. The 1/10 ounce gold eagles at $39 over melt value. A really, really good choice. And, you know, if you're looking for some utility or versatility, those would be the ones to choose.
Well, appreciate that. And you can find out more about those, or if you'd like to place an order, email us at arcadia@milesfranklin.com, or you can call 833-326-GOLD, which is 833-326-4653. And Andrew, I'll just wrap up on this note here, because with all that talk about functionality, versatility, utility, I just wanted to mention that in our quest to get Silver Chopper Ben in the hands of the people, we did have to clear something through legal, and it took a big step forward.
I'm listening.
This news is so exciting that the man can't even stay seated in his chair. And frankly, I agree, because
I wanted to show my Silver Chopper Ben. There it is.
Yeah, well, Andrew, you're going to want to get one of your guitars in a second there, because what I've noticed here is that in terms of the optionality and functionality, that's the propellers. You can actually use it as a slide guitar, as demonstrated here. You can't do that with copper. It only works with the silver conductivity. So for all the musicians out there in the crowd, here's your propeller set.
And they do come off very easily, as you can see.
So as the old saying goes, is there anything that a Silver Chopper Ben Bernanke throwing $100 bills out of a helicopter figurine can't do? I would say no. And in either case, we'll wrap up for today. But great to see you as always. Hope everyone is doing well at home. And brother. Andrew, we will catch up again next week.
And everyone out there, he's a hell of a musician. He can play the guitar and play the piano at the same time. He's damn good and damn talented. Chris, it's an honor to call you my friend, brother.
Lip syncing.
Yeah.
Fingers syncing.
Thanks for having me on. I'll see you soon.
Well, thank you, Andy, as always, for this week's report, where certainly there is plenty going on and a lot to talk about, and, you know, some things that are on everyone's mind, and rightly so. So hopefully you found that helpful and enjoyed listening at home. And before we wrap up, would like to thank First Majestic Silver, who brought us today's call, and obviously been some hurdles to overcome in the last couple of years for First Majestic, although certainly a higher silver price, as well as progress on the water situation at La Encantada, which should help bring the costs down at First Majestic. in addition to some exploration results at San Dimas that came out recently. We'll have things looking nice to see what comes up in the third quarter. And fortunately, I caught up with Keith Newmeyer at the Rule Symposium last week, and to find out a little bit more about what he had to say, certainly about the silver supply and where the silver price would have to go, perhaps, and for how long to see some of these issues being met, where we see deficits and a tight supply going forward in the face of growing industrial demand. And that interview with Keith is coming your way now.